So in the previous tutorial video, we learned about a particular way to write a nested if statement to solve our bank account problem. And we realized the way we actually organize the if statements is not going to serve the purpose. So now I'm going to simplify the structure a little bit and recap for you. And then we'll move on to how we can change the way we organize the code. So both versions, we're going to eventually see both versions compile. And both versions will not crash at runtime. But you have to know, logically speaking, which version you should choose, depending on what kind of problem you're trying to solve. That's a general lesson we are learning. Okay, so now let's switch the iPad over here. So now from version number 1, which I assume you are pretty much familiar from the previous video. Okay, let me just have a very small fragment of code to illustrate what's the essence for that example over there for version number 1. So for version number 1, basically you can see that we prompt the user, for example, for the balance, for the initial balance there, and then we want to see if the balance is actually valid, then we'll do something. Well, basically we just don't print out the error message. Otherwise, if the balance is not valid, then we're going to print the error. Okay, and then notice that the way we do the we prompt the transaction type. So this statement over here, as I said, is completely outside the if statements. So what do I mean? Let me just circle that a little bit better for you. So you can see that this is a single if statements which contains two parts over here. So this is the first part, which is if, and this is the second part for the else. They belong to the same if statements. And this prompt line over here is simply completely independent of the if statement that we are talking about, which means after executing this particular if statement over here, which can be either executing this branch over here or this branch over here, exactly one option there. After executing this if statement, we're going to execute always the orange as well. So they're completely different statements. So that's something you have to understand very well from the previous tutorial video. Okay. So now, however, what we really want to achieve is to say in the case where we actually print out the error, we don't want the program to do anything about prompting the user for transaction type, for example. So how can we fix it? The idea is we want to say either we print the error or we don't print the error, right? Or either we print the error or we continue to ask the user for more information. So the idea is we want to somehow move this line over here to the if block. That's what we want to achieve. So that's really the current version in this video that we're going to show you. Okay, let me just draw the idea to you. Okay, so now let's see that. Let me undo this so you don't see any distraction over here. Okay, so now in the second version, which look very similar to the first version, but here's the critical difference. Okay, again, we have only a single if statements over here. Okay, let me box it. So that's a single if statements where we got if part and we got else part. But what's really different from before is you can see that over here where we actually have to we can either print the error over here, okay, which is same as before, we can print the error. But now the if part to say if the error the balance is actually valid, then we will actually only under the circumstance where the balance is actually valid will we actually prompt the user for some further information, for example, transaction type. Okay, that's really the critical difference. So the essence about difference between the two versions is in version number 1, we put some further action outside the if statements. In version number 2, we put the further action part actually as the other branch where the error does not occur. Okay, so this is the critical difference between the two versions. Let me give you a little bit more details conceptually about version number 2, and then we'll move on to coding, which will be quite quick to do. And then I will trace some program together with you. Okay, let's go to the next slide over here. So now for version number 2, which we're going to do, basically what you're going to have is like this. So let's just see how many if statements we have. Okay, let me just use some highlighter over here to show you. The first if statement is like this. So this is the first one. Okay, where we got if and we got else. That's the first one. In the case of the else part, what we will do is we're going to report some error in the case where if you can see that if the balance is not valid, then we will print the error, right? So that's the else part. Okay, that's how you understand the outermost if statements. And then for the if part, we actually got some nested if statements, which is the one that that's highlighted in pink. So now let me just do it again. So basically, this part over here is the nested if statements, and this nested if statement will only be executed when the balance is actually valid. Only if this condition here over here is satisfied. Okay? And then only if the balance is valid are we actually going to execute this single if statements. And for that one, we got an if part. We also got an else part. Okay? Okay. Also the else part over here. So now for the if part, it's basically going to check to see over here if the transaction is valid or not, either D or W. In the case where it is not valid, then we're going to print out the error over here. Okay. Otherwise, we are actually going to execute the branch for the if. In that case, we got another nested if statement, right? So now it's going to be orange. So I'll highlight in orange over here. This part over here. So this is just another if statements over here. So overall, we got 3 if statements. We got the blue and the pink and the orange. So they are nested within each other, right? You can see the orange one is nested within the pink one. And the pink one is nested within the blue one, which is very common to do in programming. So I just want you to get used to this kind of syntax, okay? And then in the case of orange, we can I don't have space, but we'll see that in the code. We say that if the amount over there is actually valid, then we can do further processing over here. So over here, we might simply ask the user, so what's we can simply say if the amount is valid, it's not negative, for example, it's not too much to withdraw, then we'll simply go ahead and do the withdrawal. Otherwise, we might just want to print out the error over here. Okay, so that's kind of the overall structure for version 2. So now how do we move on from version number 1 to version number 2? So we're gonna do quite a bit of cut and paste, which I'll do together with you. Okay, so we're going to duplicate version number 1 from the previous video, and then we'll do some cut and paste to get to the new version, the version number 2. And then I'm going to trace some code together with you, so you will see exactly how the new code is going to behave. And then I want you to really compare by yourself. Take your time. You really want to digest to see how the difference is between the 2 programs. Okay, both are possible for your future application. Okay, you just want to know which one to use. Okay, let's go back here. So this is version number 1 from the previous video. I will close that first, and then go back to Package Explorer, and then let me also clear the console. You can right click on the console and say clear. Okay. So now I will simply duplicate it. So I can right click on the class for version number 1, and I can say copy, and then right click on the package and I can say paste. Okay, it will say bank app 2. Okay, that's fine. I will say okay. And then I will click on bank application 2, and then I'll maximize the tag. Okay, so now to save some a little bit space, so I want to really minimize the comments in this particular version. You pretty much know it's the same problem that we're trying to solve. I just want to do some cut and paste. I will remove all the comments in the code, so you can see exactly only the code. Okay, I'm also going to remove stage number 1. Okay, I'll remove all the empty lines. Okay, and then okay, valid initial balance. That's good. I'll keep that. And also for stage number 2, I'll remove this comments over here, and also remove this alternative way of writing things over here. Okay, just no new line. And then I'm going to also remove this over here, and then so it'll be easier for you to see exactly what's being cut and paste. And also I remove this line here, that's alternative, and then I'll remove this line here. Okay, and then I'll remove these 2 empty line and stage 4. Okay, so now it's getting a little bit more compact. So now this is what I'm going to show you. This is how you can see it. Okay, so up to here, we are reading basically the balance from the user. Okay, we're going to say the following. Okay, let me just put some new line over here. Okay, we're saying that if the balance is within this correct range, then we're going to proceed to do something, which is basically the rest of the code over here. Okay, we're gonna do some cut and paste. Otherwise, we're gonna print out the error. So either this, do something further, or we print out the error and terminate the program. Okay. So what I would do is, could you please just select all the way until the end, except for input.close. Okay, include that still as the last line for your code. Okay, up to here. Okay, make sure selecting from here until here, and then you can simply right click and you can say cut. Okay, so now make sure, okay, let me just go back and make sure input.close is still the last line over here. Okay, outside the if else. So now everything we just cut and paste will now become the body of code for this particular if branch. So that's what I would do. Okay, and then I will simply right click and then I would say paste. You can see that everything still compiles, right? This kind of a mimic what I just explained over here, right? So now what we have over here is the pink part. So this is the big part that I just cut and paste into. Okay, just make sure you understand that. Okay, and then I'll go back to the Eclipse over here. So now let me try to analyze a little bit further. So the second input that we so this is the first balance that first input we just asked the user to enter. The second input is the transaction type over here, right? So now what I want you to see is you can see either the type would be D or the type would be W, in which case we can do some further processing. Otherwise, we print out the error. Okay, so now let me just do something over here. So we got either enter amount for type, whatever. Okay, so now what I would do is, so this part over here, we gotta split it in some way, but I'll do it together with you. Okay, so now what we can do is, for both cases, for D and W, we actually need to actually prompt the user for some amount, right? Okay, so what we would do is, in the case where type.equals D, we're gonna do something here. Okay, I can simply just do this. Okay, let me just copy. Okay, just right click and then you can say copy. Okay, which means I'm gonna prompt the user for some amount, enter amount for the particular type, which can be D in this case. Okay, and then over here, in the case where it is withdraw, I'm just going to copy the same block of code. Okay, just go copy that. You can say copy again. And then over here, I can simply paste. So which means in both cases, for deposit and withdraw, I'm just going to prompt the user further for some amount. Okay, and in some case, you can see a little bit duplicate over here, but I would say that's okay. We're still starting to learn. If you are curious about how to simplify that, you can try that by yourself, maybe by declaring only, one thing to note. This is something I will cover later in the course. It's called the scope of variable. I'll mention that. The scope of variable amount over here, you can see, let me just do this comment, maybe here, that'll be better. Okay, the scope of variable amount, which we declare over here, is only limited to the if branch, which means whenever you talk about amount in this particular branch over here, you're really referring to this amount. Similarly, let me just copy this comment over here and I will show you. They just happen to call the same name, which is okay if they belong to different scopes. Over here, scope of variable amount, which is over here, is only limited to the else if branch. Which means inside this particular branch, whenever we refer to amount, we are referring to this particular amount, not this one here, right? Because they belong to different scope. We got scope number 1 over here, and we got scope number 2. Okay, different scope. So we can have the same name for the variable as long as they belong to different scope. Okay. Okay, so now in both cases we got amount, and now what we want to do, so this 3 lines we already copied to both places. Let's delete it. Okay, and then what we will do is now we want to do for this part here. This belongs to the case where the type.equals D is true, right? Let's just copy this one here, and then we'll say cut. Okay, what I will do is for D, I'm just going to enter a new line here. You can see under the D over here, right? So I will just paste. Right click, and then I'll say paste. Okay, that's the part for the deposit. And then I will hit a new line under the W branch, else if branch. And then in that case, I'm going to just cut and paste this part over here, right, under the W. I'll right click on the block and then I'll say cut again. Okay, and then I will just go to over here under the W branch over here. I'm going to paste it. Right click and then I'll say paste. Okay, so now that means we can delete everything up to here. So D and W, so these 2 branches are already covered, so we don't need that. And then you can see that outside, you can see this is a big if statements over here. You can see we got if, else if, and else. This is a single if statement that's nested within this particular if branch over here. Okay, and then you can see outside this particular if statements, we have this. resulting balance after performing transaction, right? But notice one thing. This particular line is still within this line here. I'm talking about line number 49 over here. 49 over here. At the moment, it belongs to basically this particular if branch. Okay. So now, what issue we have over here? Actually, we are forced to do some simplification of the code, which is good. I like it. I didn't anticipate that. So now let's have a look. It is complaining that the amounts over here cannot be resolved to a variable. It's a very common mistake. Okay. So what I would do, I would like to illustrate this on the iPad together with you, so you can really understand this completely. Okay. Is it possible to make this a little bit smaller? So let me see what I can do over here. You know what? I want to reduce the number of lines a little bit so that I can take a nice screenshot. Can I just remove some line over here? Okay, like that. Okay, so you can still see the same code. No, actually, let's not do this. It's gonna compromise your comprehension. So let's not do that. Let me just undo. Let me still keep this. I really want to explain what this error really means over here. Okay. So now what I will do is, let me see how far I can scroll down while still keeping that line over there. Actually, this is not too bad. Okay, how about just that? So now I'm going to copy and paste this particular fragment of code to my iPad, and I'll illustrate to you why. Oops. I will illustrate to you why it is invalid. Okay, something to do with scope. So once I visualize it, it'll be very clear. Okay, let me copy that and switch to my iPad. Okay, so now let's talk about this particular scenario. Okay, I will just add a new page, current template. Okay, and then what I will do is I'm gonna paste it. Okay, let me just paste it over here. Okay, like that. At the moment, let me just make it a little bit smaller. Okay, that's just good enough. At the moment, Eclipse is complaining that this amount over here cannot be resolved to be a variable. But you might be confused because we did declare double here, amount, and also we also declare double amount over here. Okay, let me explain again. Okay, so now this is how you can understand the issue over here. First of all, let's identify the single if statements. It's like this. Let me just use this highlighted here. So now let me just box this so you will see exactly what's going on. So now the box I'm trying to surround over here. Okay, this box over here is a single if statements. So this is a single if statements. Okay, and for the if statements, they have two branches, right? So one branch is over here. So you can see that over here, this is one branch. This is the if branch. Okay, and we call the orange part is basically we can call that the scope of the if branch. Of the if branch. Okay, let's have another one. What about the else branch? The else branch, let me draw in blue over here. So this is the scope for the else branch over here. Okay, let me write it in blue. So this is the scope of the else branch. Okay, we got two scopes over here. And the orange scope and the blue scope are completely non-overlapping, which means they're completely independent of each other. Okay, so now if you look at the variable over here, we have amount over here that's declared. We have another amount that is declared. Okay, so now we call that the variable scope in the following sense. This particular amount is only visible within this particular scope, only within the blue scope. Which means outside this particular blue else if branch, this amount simply just cannot be referenced. Okay? If you want to refer to a variable, it must be in the right scope. In this case, you just cannot refer to this amount here. It's only limited to what I just trying to draw over here, right? It's only limited to that. Similarly, if you look at this particular amount over here, which I circle in green, this amount here, in a similar sense, is only constrained to this particular scope. Outside this particular scope over here, this amount here is simply not visible. Okay? So now, let's talk about this particular line. So let's highlight the last line in a different color, and then I'll try to explain how the variable scope for that particular line is relevant to the one we have just highlighted so far. Okay, so let's use yellow over here to highlight the last line over here. Okay, so let's use yellow here. So let's highlight this particular line over here. And of course, this is the line where we had the compilation error. Okay. So now, to really see this variable scope, I have to really bring our main method into context so you can see very clearly what's going on over here, okay? Let me just move this block of code a little bit so it'll be very clear for you to see how this can fit into the context, okay? So now, let me move this, maybe something like this, okay? So now, I want you to recall very quickly from the code, okay? If we go back to Eclipse over here, you can see basically this is basically the code that we are talking about over here, right? This is a block, and this is within the if block over here, which I'm going to show to you. There's an if block, and there's also the else block over here, and also it's wrapped within the main method over here. Okay, let's see that exactly. Okay. So now let me just, you know what? I can just make this a little bit to the right, even further. So it'll be even easier for me to illustrate. Okay, let me put it just to the right boundary over here. Okay, good. So now you can now see this. Okay, let me use blue. Basically what we have is this. We have basically if, over here, if the balance is valid, in that case, we're going to have this particular block over here. Otherwise, we're going to print out the error to say that the balance you just entered is not valid, and then we terminate the program. Of course, after this line over here, you can think actually I'm running out of space. But the last line I'm trying to write a little bit here is simply input dot close over here. Okay, it is line over here, right? Hopefully you can see the structure. And then what about the main method? You can think about these are all the lines in your main method. And then you can think about here we got public static void, and this is your main method here, right? Main method, and then this, and then of course I don't have space, but you can imagine it's here, right? So now how can we deal with the scope for this particular yellow highlights over here? Okay, this is how you can think of it. So now I'm thinking this way. Because we know that basically you can think about this is for this particular if branch over here. This is a single if statement, the red one, okay? This is a single if statement. And this is the second statement. You can see the very first statement is very long, but it's still counted as a one single statement. And this is the second statement we have, which is highlighted in yellow. So this is the second one. So the first one and the second one, okay? They actually are independent of each other. Okay, so now how can we actually declare something that can be read by this particular line? So the answer is we have to declare the variable in the same scope. But what do I mean in the same scope? Basically in the same scope for this particular if branch. Okay, so now let me just draw another line for you. Okay, so now I'm going to draw a scope that is going to include both statements over here, both of them. Okay, so now what I will do is let me use green. Okay, so now let me use green and then use that. Okay, that should be good. So now this is what I will do. Okay, so now you can think about the green scope. Basically, is going to cover both statements over here. Okay, over here. And the green scope is exactly the scope for this particular if branch. Okay, so now that means anything that we add to the green scope is going to be visible to the yellow line. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, so what we can do is over here. So what we can add is outside this particular if statements over here, we can add a line. We can let me just use a different color. We can just add a line over here to declare the amounts. If we can declare the amounts over here, and then we simply reuse it, so get rid of the decoration over here, and so this will just work. Okay, so the idea is, let me just try to draw that very quickly for you. Okay, just do another illustration. It's kind of like a tricky thing, but I'll try to illustrate as much as I can. Okay, basically we're saying that we have a if condition over here, and then of course we got an else branch over here. And we know that somehow over here, the print line somehow has to refer to the amounts. And also we got another nested if then else, right? If over here, and also we got else over here, right? And we know that somehow this one will be for deposit, the other one else if. Also this will be for withdraw. Okay, if and else if. And now for the deposit, we have to somehow do something to the amount. We had to add to the amounts. And for the withdrawal, we're going to subtract from the amount, right? You can see we have to refer to the amounts in different places. We have to refer to it over here, and over here. Okay? So now the best way for us to achieve this would be as follows. Okay? Would be if you simply declare the double amounts over here. That's what we can do. Let's say initially the amount is is going to be read by the user, right? Input the next double. Okay. So now as soon as we have done this, basically the amount will be actually in a scope that is going to overlap with the if branch, else if branch, and also the print line. So let me just illustrate this quickly. Okay. So now you can think about this is basically the scope right now for the amounts over here. So this is scope, which contains this particular print statements, which also contains this particular if branch, which also contains this particular if statements over here. Since it contains that, so it's going to work. Okay. So again, this amount which we declare, this amount over here that we declare is in a scope over here that is going to contain this scope over here and also this scope over here. So this amount will be, this amount will make sense, and also this amount will make sense, and this amount will also make sense. Yeah, we'll try to cover maybe variable scope a little bit more thoroughly, but this one is just to give you some feel about how to make variable work. So every time you want to make sure you have a variable that can be shared between different scope over here and also over here, just declare that at the outermost scope possible. Okay, let me show you. Let's go back to Eclipse over here, and then we'll do it. Okay, so what we'll do is we're going to say over here. So now after enter the transaction type, we're going to prompt the user for the amounts. So what I would do is, can you just select this block over here, only up to here. Okay, these lines. Okay, and then we're going to cut it. Okay, and then I'm gonna paste it over here, right? You can say right click and then paste. Okay, so this is the amount over here that we're gonna declare outside the scope for if and else if. Okay, and then I'm gonna just make this look a little bit better. And now this part over here at the moment doesn't compile because you can see there's a variable declaration clash. We already declared the amount over here. However, we are declaring that again. So this is not good. So we're going to get rid of it. Okay, so we'll simply get rid of these lines over here. That's what we'll do. Okay, so now everything just compile, right? So please just try to see exactly what we changed when we actually move from version 1 to version 2. Especially, this might be the trickiest thing in this particular tutorial video because we are trying to declare the amount variable over here that can be used, that can be referred to both in the if branch and also in the else branch and also outside this particular if statements. But this amount over here is this line here, it is still within the scope for this particular if branch, so that is still okay, right? Again, if you just simply put your mouse on top of the amount over here, you can see all the gray highlight over here shows all the usages for the amount. Okay, hopefully that makes sense to you. All right, so that's about this particular change. Okay, so now we do have the code. I want to illustrate to you the 3 test cases that we did in the previous video. Let's illustrate that first, and then we'll trace the code manually on the iPad. Okay, just for your maximum understanding possible. So now let's right click on app 2 and then say run as Java application. Okay, so now let's try the different test cases for you. Remember when we say -200, in the previous case, the program wouldn't just terminate, it will still prompt us for the transaction type. But now what about now? Okay, now you can see that it will simply say error, initial balance -200 is not in this interval, and you can see the program has terminated already. This is good, it's a correct behavior. Okay, for test 1, it's now good. So now let's try test number 2, which means we're gonna have some valid initial balance, but the transaction type is not valid. Let's see what happened. Okay, so now I'll relaunch the program again, and then enter balance over here. If I say 200, which is valid, and now let's say T. So what do I expect to see here? I expect to really have an error message only and then terminate the program right away. That's what I expect to see. However, if I try that, let's see. It says enter an amount for T. So that doesn't seem to be correct actually. Okay, so now let's see why it is the case. Okay, so test number 1, that was good. But now for the test number 2, it doesn't seem to be alright. So that means our current second version is not there yet. But I'm going to show you why. But you really want to learn the intermediate version to see why they are just not perfect enough. So we want to gradually learn to get to the perfect version. Let me stop over here. I can correctly point to you over here. You can see that when we say enter a transaction type over here, and let's say we enter T, right? So that means the type over here is T. Okay, the type over here is T, and then you can see that we haven't really checked what the type is, and then we already unconditionally print this out. Enter an amount for example, T. That's why we saw that. So this place should not be there really. Okay. However, we do want to keep this declaration for the amount so that it can be referred to in this last line. That's why we actually got this declaration move out over here. Okay. So now what can we do? Okay, I would suggest the following. Again, you're trying to learn just from this example. You can definitely be a little bit more creative if you find another possible solution for this problem here. Okay, I'll just show you one possibility here. So what I would do is I will only prompt the user for this amount if it's already sure it's either D or W, right? So now this is what I would suggest. Okay, so what I should do is I will simply just cut the variable declaration for the amount. I will simply say the following. I can I will do the input and next double a little bit later only if I need to. Okay, now I will declare the variable amount to be, let's say 0.0, just some default value. Okay, because always you can have some value that does not just make sense yet. Okay, so I'll just say 0.0. And then what I would do is I would say amount is reassigned to input dot next double. Okay, that's what I would do. Okay, over here. So what I would do now is I'm going to simply select this guy here, and then could you please just cut this one here, okay? Which means we'll only prompt the user again if we are sure it's a valid transaction type. For example, over here, you can simply paste over here. Okay, that means, for example, if we know that transaction type is actually D, so we can say enter an amount for D. And then, so this scope is only limited to the if branch. That's fine. And then we will actually reassign the amount which we declare over here to whatever the value is. Okay. Similarly, we do the same thing under the W part, right? In that case, we say if the type dot equals W, that means we want to do withdraw. In that case, we can also paste the code over here. We'll right click and we say paste. And now here, we say enter an amount for maybe W in here, and then the scope of the variable amount is only limited to, so now you want to be careful over here. Let me just give you more correct comments. Delete this comment over here, and delete this comment over here, right? because now what we have is the amount over here. Oh, oops, sorry. So now I want to give you some correct comment here. So the scope of variable amount is limited to the if statements. Limited to the if branch of basically this particular if branch, okay, which means you can refer to this amount variable inside this particular scope. Let me just highlight it over here, right? This is the entire scope for that if branch that you can refer to, right? Including this line over here, okay? So now how can we, let me just document that properly. The if branch of, okay, let me just copy this condition here so you can see exactly that's the if condition we are trying to do, okay? The if branch of this particular branch, okay? So now what I will do is, let's test it again. So now we're just moving to, hopefully now it's a final version for version 2. Okay, let me just delete this line here, and then let's see. So now we relaunch the program again. So now if I say, let's say 200, that's what we tried before, and then we'll say D or W, let's say T. And then what I will have is, yeah, that's good. Error, transaction type T is neither D nor W. And since in that case, we simply wouldn't do anything to the resulting balance. In that case, it remained to be 200. Okay, so neither deposit nor withdrawal can be done. So that's why there's the initial balance, and the program terminates. So that's the correct behavior. Okay, and then one more. Test number 3. Let's say we got 200 over here, which is valid. Let's say we want to withdraw. Oh, oops, sorry. It should be lowercase. Okay, so it's case sensitive. Let me run to the program again. So let's say 200 and then W. And now let's say the amount. If I say minus 20 over here, then it's going to complain to say it's not positive, right? The error message. And then it simply wouldn't do anything to the initial balance over here. Let's do one more. What about if I do, let's say 200, and then let's say it's a withdrawal, and then I say $10, for example. And then it's going to say resulting balance is now 190, right? So now we got different test cases to show you, okay? So now what I would like to do is quite a complicated structure of if statements, but I think it's worth trying to see what the execution flow. So let's now try to trace the code. So because it's getting a little bit too large, so I would suggest I change the font size very quickly, okay? So now I'll just go to preferences, and then I will type fonts over here. I'll change the font size. Currently simply 18, okay? What about I just change them to 12, let's say, hopefully they can fit well. Okay, that's pretty good. So what I will try to do is, I'm gonna try just copy, let's say from the very beginning, the first prompt over here, okay? Everything until over here. Okay, so you can see the whole structure over here. Okay, and then let me just paste them to the iPad, okay? And they'll do all the 4 cases for you. Okay. Okay, so now what I will do, I will paste the code over here, and then let me just try to get it as large as we can. Okay, I think that's the largest I can get into. Could it be good? Okay, good. So now you can see the whole structure over here. Okay, just for the very first test case, let's see exactly the if statements we have. Again, it's a recap. Okay. So overall, we have this particular if statements over here. We got if, and we got else, right? We can see if else. So you can see the if part over here. We see the else part over here. Okay, and then in turn for the if part, we also got another nested if, which I'm gonna say orange. I'm gonna use pink. Let's say. So now you can see that this is the if, and then else if, and then else, for which we got the if part. We got an else if part, and also we got the else part, okay? And now inside the if part and inside the else if part, we also got nested if statements, right? So now let's see that quickly. So now let's say we do blue here. So this is another nested if, okay? You can see the if part, else if part, and the else part, okay? And then over here, let's say we got the green. So this is the if part, else if part, and the else part, okay? If part, else if, and else. I'll try to keep these colors annotated so you can see exactly what's going on. But of course, usually when you don't have any coloring on your code, that's something you want to have in your mind conceptually. Okay. So now let's try the different test cases and see how they can be executed. Okay. So now I might just refer to the if branches using the yellow. Using the color, we got yellow, we got pink, we got blue, and we got green. Right. So now let's try the first test case. Let's say the first test case. Let's say test 1. So let's say we're going to ask the user for balance. Let's say the balance is simply just minus 200. Okay, that's the first test case. And what we expect to see is it's going to simply give us an error message and terminate the program. Okay, let's see exactly how it is going to execute. So now it's going to go to this line here. Okay, first of all, it's going to, let's say, first line over here. And then it's going to enter a balance, and then it's going to go to the second line here, and then input the next double, in which case we say minus 200. And because of coercion, so this balance is going to be minus 200.0. Okay, so that's what we have stored so far. And then we execute this particular yellow if statements, right? And we check the if branch first. And now what we have to check is this particular condition over here, where the balance is simply minus 200. So this is what we're checking. 0 less than minus 200, which is this balance here, and this balance is also minus 200. Ampersand, conjunction, minus 200 less than or equal to 1000. So what do we have? Well, apparently this part is simply false. 0 cannot be less than a negative number. And this one here is true. Okay, so false and true, at least one of them is true, false. So that means overall it's going to be false. So that means this condition here is simply just false. Okay, that's what we have. So now what does that mean? That means we're actually going to bypass the following. We're going to bypass, so this whole thing as the body for the if branch is just going to be bypassed. I just put a cross mark over here. That means we're only going to go to the else part over here and then execute this line over here, right? So when we go to the else part, we're just going to print out error, initial balance, and then the balance is simply minus 200.0. As we just said, because of coercion, it's not in this particular scope. Okay, that's test case number 1. Okay. Hopefully you can see that clearly. Okay, so now we're going to do test case number 2. Okay, so now we're going to just copy and paste the same code, and then we try to see what's going on. Okay, let's now go to the same code. Okay, again, I'm going to maximize to a little bit too big. How about this? Sorry. Okay, let me move that to here. I may have to make it even smaller. Okay, that'll be good. Again, let's follow the same convention over here. So yellow, pink, blue, green. I'll do that quickly. So this is the yellow part. Okay, and then this is the pink. Okay. Okay, and then we have the blue part over here. And then we have the green part over here. And to really save some time for future, let me just actually copy this guy over here, the whole thing. So that later on, I can just copy and paste for the other test cases. Okay, let me just copy that. Okay, good. So now let's try test case number 2. So now for test case number 2, we have some valid balance, let's say 200. However, we have some invalid transaction type. Let's say for the transaction type, we simply got T. So it's neither D nor W. So what we'll do is we'll box this test case, and then we'll do it, let me do it again. And then we'll do it together. Okay, so now let's trace it. Again, first line, we're going to enter a balance. Okay, and then for the balance, we're going to enter 200. And because of coercion, we're going to store 200.0. And then we're going to evaluate this condition over here, right? This condition over here. So it's going to be 0 less than 200.0 and 200.0 less than or equal to 1000. It should be quite obvious to you. This is true, and this is also true, right? So overall, it's going to be true for conjunction. Okay, so that means this condition over here is just going to be true. So true simply means which part do we have to bypass, which means this part as the body for the else branch is going to be bypassed. That means we have to go into this branch over here and execute line by line. Okay, for this particular one here, we're going to say enter a transaction type over here, either D or W, and then we're going to enter T. And then, so that means this part here is going to be the string T. And then, so that means type is going to store the string T. And then we're going to declare this particular variable called the amount. Okay, you can think about the amount over here is simply going to be a variable. Initial value is simply 0.0. And now we want to see which branch for this particular pink if statement here, either the if branch or the else if branch or the else branch, either of the three options will be executed, exactly one. Okay, so now let's try to see. So what we'll get is, you can see that over here, when we try to evaluate this, the type is simply just T, right? So what we get is T dot equals D. They are not the same, so that would just be false. So this part here will just be false. That means the entire body for the if branch is just going to be bypassed. And then what about checking this? This similarly, so this is T. So now if we got T dot equals W, they're not the same string. Of course, it's going to be false. So that means this entire part for the if else if branch is also going to be bypassed. That means we're only going to go into the else branch by default. In which case we're going to say error transaction type, in this case T, as we store over here, right? The T is neither D nor W. Okay, so this is what we will execute eventually. Okay, let me just highlight it. So this is really the line that we will execute eventually after this. Okay, hopefully you can see the idea over here. Really try to link the tracing back to the console application demonstration I just made on the Eclipse. Okay, let's do third case. Okay, let's do a third case over here, case number 3. Okay, so now let me put it here. Okay, that's save time. Okay, so now let's for test number 3. So test 3. Okay, what I can do is, let's try this. Let's say the balance is actually, let's say 100. 200 is fine. Let's keep 200. And then let's say the transaction type is actually, let's say W, withdraw. And also, let's say the amount that we are trying to withdraw. Let me give you some invalid value. Okay, that's for test 3. Let's say minus 1000. Okay, that's the third case we want to talk about. Let's see exactly what's going to happen. Okay, let's put this in the box. Okay, let's see. Let's try to trace in a very similar way. Okay, so now when we store the value for the balance, so this part here is going to be minus 200 from the user. 200, and then so that means 200.0 is stored over here. And now what about the branching condition for if? So again, we got 0 less than 200 and 200 less than or equal to 1000, where we calculated this already. So this should be true. Okay, so this condition over here should be true. That means we have to bypass the else branch, right? So now we have to execute this if branch line by line. So now we're going to say enter a transaction type, and then we're going to store the transaction type from the user, and we assume that they're going to enter W. So it's going to be store W over here. Okay, so now we declare this variable over here called amount, and then with the initial value 0.0, but it can be reassigned, yes. And now let's see for this condition over here. So we got type being W. So when we say W dot equals D, so they are not the same string, so it's going to be false. So that means this particular branching condition is going to be false. That means we're going to bypass the body for this particular if condition, okay? If branch. And then what about the else if branch? The else if branch, we know the type is simply W. So now when we say W dot equals W, they are the same string, which means it's going to be true. So that means this part here is going to be true. and we're going to bypass the else branch because exactly branch is going to be executed. The very first satisfying branch will be executed. So now we're going to execute this branch over here line by line. So now the first line, enter an amount for, in here the type would be simply just T, right? W, as we stored before. It's just going to be W. And then we're going to enter the amount. So now the amount is going to be stored, going to be read from the user. Let's say the user enter minus 1,000. If they enter minus 1,000, so minus 1,000 will be reassigned to the amount. So that means rather than storing this, it's going to be 1,000.0 because of coercion, right? So now the amount is minus 1,000.0. And then now we're going to check again. And now we go into this particular if branch, the green one. Okay, exactly one branch will be executed. So now the amount is now minus 1,000. So minus 1,000 less than or equal to 0 is true. That means this condition here is true, and we are just going to bypass the rest of the if statement for the green if statements. So these will not be executed. So that means we'll only execute this particular line. So error, the withdrawal amount is not positive. Okay? Okay, hopefully the test number 3 also makes sense to you. Okay? So now, what we can do is, let me just highlight, so since we haven't done the execution flow, what's really the execution flow for this particular program? So basically, let me highlight everything that will be executed. So now this line here, this line here, this line here, and then we evaluate the if branch, and of course we go to the if branch. So we do this line, we do this line here, and then we do this line here, and then we evaluate this line and realize the if condition, the type is simply not D. So we're going to bypass the body for this if branch. And then we evaluate the else if branch, in which case W is equal to W, right? So now we're going to execute line by line like what we did. This line, and now we know that this line, this branch amount less than or equal to 0 is true. That means we're going to bypass the else if and else and only execute this line here. Okay, okay, that's what we have. Okay, hopefully you can see that this whatever I highlight in green are the lines that will be executed for test number 3. Okay, now I have an exercise for you, so do this for your own sake. Okay, and do that to make sure you understand. I want you to do test 3.2, let's say. Okay, it's a second test case for you. How would you trace the program using this kind of notes to say balance is 200, the same, and the type is also withdraw, but let's say the amount right now is, let's say, 250. I want you to try and see how this can be traced. Okay, let me just try to see if I can draw a box like this. Okay, good. So that's the test number 3.2. I would like you to trace for yourself. Okay, I want specifically what will actually happen when the amount is too big to withdraw. Okay, finally, let's do a final trace for test case number 4, which we can do withdraw positive. So I'm gonna paste the code again. So let's do the final case very quickly. So now let's say we are trying to withdraw something that's not too large. So what I would do is I'll use green. So let's say this is test number 4, where the balance, let's say, is 200, and also the transaction type is withdraw, and also the amount we are trying to withdraw is not too large. Let's say 150, which is affordable. Okay, and then let's box this over here, and then we'll trace it together. Okay, and then we'll highlight the execution flow as well. Okay. By the way, let's see the previous one. Before I do that one there, let me also highlight the execution flow for you. Okay, for test number 2. Okay, so we try to do this line over here. We do this line over here, and then we do this line here because the balance is valid, and then we execute this line over here, and then we execute this line over here. And because the transaction type is not D, it's actually T, right? It's not D. So we bypass the if branch. It is also not W. So we bypass the else if branch. That is why we eventually go to only the else branch over here. Okay, that's test case number 2. Okay. Now for completeness, I'll also show you the execution flow for test 1, where the balance is simply minus. Okay, so now we're going to execute this line, and then execute this line. And then this one is easy because as soon as we try to execute to evaluate this condition here, minus 200 is simply not a valid initial balance. So we're going to bypass the whole if branch and we only execute this line over here. Okay, it's just for completeness, so you know exactly which lines are executed based on the test case's value. Okay, because if statement is actually selective action, so it may not be the same actions that will be executed every time. Depends on the input values. So let's now do the final case over here. So now what I will do is let's do a final trace. So now we still do the first line, enter a balance, and then second line we try to enter a balance. Let's say the user enters 200. So that means over here it will be 200 and the balance will be stored because of coercion 200.0. And then we execute this line and let's try to evaluate this condition here, which will be 0 less than 200 and 200 minus less than or equal to 1000, right? This is true and this is also true. True and true will give you true. So that means over here this is going to be true. That means we're going to bypass the else branch, right? So now let's go into the if branch for the yellow part, and then let's now execute the if branch one by one. Execute this line, enter a transaction type, and then the user is going to enter, let's say, W over here. So that means W will be stored inside the type, okay? So now, and then we declare the amount over here to be a double variable with the initial value 0.0. And then we try to check to see which transaction type it is, if it is valid. And here we try to evaluate, so type over here is W. So basically we got W versus D, right? The same reasoning as before. So this is false. Okay, they're not the same, so this will be false. So that means we bypass entirely this branch over here for the if. And then what about this part here? And then we evaluate, and then that'll be W. So basically comparing W versus W. So that will be true. So that means this if branch over here will be true. That means we're going to execute this particular branch line by line. And the else branch over here is simply bypassed. Okay, finally, let's see, when we execute this line here, what amount are we going to enter? Let's say we enter 150. So that means this part here is 150. So now amount will be, because of coercion, be reassigned to 150.0. So that means 150.0. And now when we try to evaluate, again, we got another if statement, the green one. So now when we try to evaluate this condition here, so 150 less than or equal to 0, that should be false. Okay, that one is false, which means we bypass the body for this particular if branch. And then what about here? When we say amount larger than or equal to balance, amount is 150, well, you can say 0.0, that's fine, is larger than or equal to the balance which was stored as 200.0. Well, that's simply false, right? It's not larger than that. Okay, so that means this guy here is also going to be false, which means we also bypass this else if branch. Finally, we got no choice, but we go to the else branch when all the previous branching conditions are simply just false. So we execute the line under the else branch. So let me just point that to you. So now we are going to execute this line here. So now how do we understand this as a review? Okay, so now basically this is a shortcut notation for balance is assigned to balance minus the amount. So now how do we trace this? Okay, let's see exactly what's going to happen. So let me just draw another box, okay, which I didn't draw previously. Okay, you can see that from this line over here, when we actually initialize the balance to be 200, that means we basically have a box over here called balance, and then the value was simply just plus 200.0. That's what we have, right? So we just didn't draw it. So now since we draw it, so we can talk about how to trace it. So now let's go back to this line over here. So what does that mean? When we say balance is reassigned to its current value which is 200.0, minus the amount, which is 150.0. So what's this value here? This one is simply 50.0. So 50.0 is going to be reassigned to the balance, which means rather than this, it's going to be 50.0. Okay, so two things you got to understand. First of all, you have to understand how to trace a line like this, where the balance occur as the targets and the source for the assignments. And also, when you actually see this kind of augmented assignment, which we talk about in the lecture, you can also know what they really mean exactly. Okay, so now after this line over here, we are done with this particular else branch, and then the program will terminate. Okay, so now again, let's highlight the execution flow for this test number 4. Okay. Oh, actually, let me just say one more thing. So after this particular line, that means we are done with this particular if statements. So now we actually go outside this particular if branch. You can see there's no line after this. So that means we are also done with this particular else if branch, right? Because there's no further line after this particular if branch for the else if branch. So now there's no further line, so now we also finish this particular else if branch. Now once we're done with it, so that means we have to go to this line here, which is the last line for the yellow if branch over here, right? Because that's something that we decided to actually execute. So now when we do this one over here, let's see exactly what's going to happen. We can say resulting balance after performing transaction of, what's the type? Well, it's W that we have stored. So it is the W over here. Let me just show you here. That's what we stored before. W, and also with the amount, and now it's actually 150.0, which was stored over here, right? That's a 100.0. So with the amount 150.0, and what about the balance? The last balance that we reassigned to was the 50.0 that we reassigned to it, right? 50.0. Okay, so after this line here, there's no further line for the if branch that we decided to execute. You can see no further line. So that means we are done with this particular if branch. And for the else part, we decided to bypass. So now we're reaching the end of the program and we terminate. Okay, so it's quite a very thorough tracing for all the 4 test cases for a reasonably complicated program. Hopefully, you can really try to do all the tracing again by yourself. If you really got trouble, feel free to talk to me about how to trace the program. It's really an important exercise for you to do in your mind and also in the Eclipse, so that when we talk about loops later in the course, you'll be much more smoother for you. Okay, let's see what we have got. Okay, so now let me recap very quickly, because for this week we only got 2 tutorial videos for you to study. Okay, so now what you gotta see is you have basically 2 versions of the bank application 1 and bank application 2 for this current tutorial video. I want you to really study very carefully to compare. Basically, the amount of code you have to write for both versions are the same. However, the way we organize the if structure, especially the nested if statements, is completely different. So that's really why I want you to really compare. For the same test value that we try to test on both versions, the programming behavior at the runtime is different. So that's why I want you to really see the behavior yourself. Okay. Anyway, if you have doubts, you can rewatch the video or speak to me.